Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/Teamaneke.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our daily coverage of the 2020 Iditarod here on Mushing Radio on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. Be sure you hit that subscribe button so you get all of our shows as soon as they post, and check us out on social media by searching Dogworks Radio. And I am joined today by my co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going?
It's going great, Robert. We have a real race here now. I mean, there was never any doubt we would have a race, but it's very exciting to see that things have really kind of picked up and people are making their way. No one is, I believe, yet at McGrath, but people are getting closer to being there.
Yeah, it looks like a good portion of the pack is already in Nikolai, and several of them are in Roan. So it looks like they are progressing down the trail. And I read a quick report this afternoon that says that people think so far that it is, quote unquote, a perfect trail. So all that talk that we did about the snow conditions and a slower race and all that, it looks like people are rocking and rolling.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the tracker now as we're taping this, which is right around 8 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Alaska time, and 11 on the East Coast. And right now, according to the tracker, Jesse Royer is out in front, just about a mile ahead of Richie Deal, and then Aaron Burmeister and Wade Mars and Lance Mackey and Travis Beals and Yor and Thomas Werner and Pete Kaiser and Michelle Phillips. So those have been among the people who, you know, they're leapfrogging and they're moving back and forth, but those are the people who have pretty much been in the top 10 for the majority of this race since it started.
Yeah, and there's no new names on that list that you just talked about. All of those people are very familiar with being right up there in the front. And right about now is when folks are going to start taking their mandatory 24-hour rest. I know that McGrath is a big one. They're big on hospitality there, and it's a great place for mushers to stop. Can you give our listeners, in particular our new listeners, what a 24-hour rest means exactly, Alex?
Yeah, so there are a number of required rests. There's an 8-hour rest anywhere on the Yukon River. There's a mandatory 8-hour rest in White Mountain. And then somewhere along the trail, mushers are required to take a 24-hour rest. And it's at that 24 that they also make up for the differences in the starting time. So the team that started last, the team that was number 58, will rest for exactly 24 hours. Number 57 will rest for 24 hours and 2 minutes, and so on and so forth. So the earlier teams have more rest built in so that they are, after they get off their 24, they are even in terms of, there's no time differential from the start time. And generally what will happen is it's a chance for the mushers to to rest up. It's a chance for the dogs to rest a little bit, although I think the mushers probably need this rest more than the dogs. And it's also a time when a lot of people who have shipped sleds down the trail will change their sleds from being in the early part of the race where there's a lot of hills and where you go over the steps and down the Dalzell Gorge. So they might switch to another sled if they have one. They can also do repairs if they need to do any repairs. And it's kind of a chance for them to get recalibrated for the next part of the race.
And they can literally take this 24-hour rest anywhere along the trail. It has to be at a checkpoint, and they have to declare that they're taking their 24-hour rest when they get there. They don't have to do it immediately, but they have to go tell the race officials, I'm going to declare my 24, and then the time starts. I assume, I'm not 100% sure, but does the time start when they checked in or when they declare? I believe it's when they check in. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's when they check in.
And go ahead, Alex.
The traditionally, McGrath used to be a place where people would take their 24s a lot. As the race sped up, people started taking their 24s a little bit later. Takatna, which is the next checkpoint up from McGrath, which is the checkpoint that is very, very famous for their pies, where people will have, hundreds and hundreds of pies are baked, and the mushers just love the pies. That's a place where people take their 24s a lot. But it really depends on what the condition of the teams are and what the condition of the trail is. And a lot of mushers will come in and they'll have a plan where they're fairly sure that they're going to take their 24 in one place. But what often happens is something changes. Maybe the dogs are either doing much better than they thought, or maybe the dogs need a little bit more rest. And so those plans can often change.
And one last thing on the 24-hour rest. If a person takes their 24 and they declare it and it's over, they're going to fall way back down into the rankings, way down into the last 2/3 of the rankings, typically because everybody that is not taking that 24 is sort of leapfrogging them down the trail. But just remember, for folks that are listening, they have to take that 24 as well. So the race really doesn't start until just about everybody's taken their 24. Is that right?
Right. And that is why it's a little bit tricky sometimes to determine who's actually winning, especially once people start taking their 24s, because someone will fall back to, from being in the top 10 to maybe being 30th or 35th. But then when they're done with their 24, they get to leapfrog over all of the people who had gone ahead. So you have to kind of take into account how much distance somebody is going to cover in those 24 hours.
Right. Okay, Alex, let's jump over to some news of the day. I know you have a report about Jim Lanier. This is not official yet. Nothing's been released in terms of a press release or anything that they typically do. But what do you know about Jim?
So Jim Lanier was, I believe this morning, had left Rainy Pass and gone out to what seems to be at or near the top of the Dalzell Gorge. And he stopped, and he was there for quite a long time, and a lot of teams passed him. I think there were probably a dozen or maybe even 15 or 16 teams who passed him. He was there for about 8 hours. And then when he finally started moving again, he was backtracking back towards Rainy Pass. And he is now reportedly back in Rainy Pass. And it seems likely that something has gone wrong, either something with his sled, something involving him, something involving the dogs. We don't, as you said, we don't yet know. And I imagine that we will probably know in the next few hours, or have a better idea in the next few hours. It seems likely, although it's, again, it's not 100% certain, that he is probably going to scratch, because that is not the sort of thing that people generally do if they're fine and are going to continue down the trail, or if their team is fine. And also, relatively recently, about a half hour ago or so, um, his Jim's wife had posted on Facebook that she doesn't know exactly what's happened, but Jim and all 14 of his dogs are safe at Rainy Pass Lodge. And she said that she'll let Jim talk about it when he can, and that she's very sad and she's sure that he is very sad, which again, this is not official and we don't want to jump the gun, but that is not the sort of language that you use when somebody is going to be continuing down the trail.
And Alex, there is a backstory to this. Can you fill us in a little bit about what happened in the off season? It's something that's sort of unprecedented in terms of Iditarod.
So Jim had applied to run the 2020 Iditarod, and it is very, very rare. It's almost unheard of for an Iditarod veteran to apply to run the race and be turned down. I can only think of a couple of times that it's happened in the past. And there was concern that Jim had scratched in his last few attempts at Iditarod. There were concerns with how he had done in some other races, and he had also had some health issues and some injuries. So the ITC was concerned that he would not be able to take adequate care of his dogs in running the entire race. So essentially, what they said to him is, you have to requalify as if you were a rookie. So Jim, rather than complaining about this, which honestly I think is what a lot of people would have done and probably what I would have done, he just said okay, and he went out and he completed the qualifying races that he would need to requalify for Iditarod. And they announced that he had done this, and he entered late and paid the late fee, and was all set and was running Iditarod. So it's it's not clear to me, if this is a dog issue, if this is a health issue, or an equipment issue, or what exactly was going on. But it's a very sad thing, and I don't know Jim very well, but I've met him a few times, and he's a really wonderful guy, a guy who has great stories of the Iditarod going back to the early days in the late 70s. And it's just it's personally sad for me to see him to see this happen to him.
Yeah, I agree, and hopefully everything is okay. And like you said, we don't know exactly what the deal is, whether it's equipment, dogs, people, or trail, or it could be a number of things. So I'm sure we'll hear more, and we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow night. Let's jump over to our next segment. We're going to talk tonight about dropped dogs, and this is kind of right on cue because this morning you released one of your Tales from the Trail stories about dropped dogs. Jump into it, and then I will answer some musher side questions.
Right. So there have been a number of dogs that were dropped today, and I should say that the Iditarod is trying to push for people not to use the term drop dogs, but instead to say returned dogs. And basically, what it is that you can start with up to 14 dogs, and almost everyone will start with 14 dogs. And as you go down the trail, if a dog is not feeling well, sometimes a dog is in heat and you don't want that dog to distract from the rest of your team. Sometimes the dog has some kind of injury. You can leave the dog at a checkpoint and you can't replace dogs, but you can leave one of your original 14 dogs at any of the checkpoints. And also, sometimes people will take dogs with them that they do not expect will be able to finish the race. Either it's a young dog and they want to give the dog experience with racing or with being on a competitive team. They don't really expect the dog will go all the way, but they want the dog to have that kind of experience. And in that case, it's not unusual for the dog to be dropped at some point because the mushers want these races to be a really great experience for the dog. So you want to be able to, with very young dogs or dogs that you're training, to let them stop before it becomes a bad experience for them. And what happens is when the dogs are left at checkpoints, they're taken care of by usually vets and volunteers, And then, depending on where they are, they will be sometimes flown to another checkpoint, a larger checkpoint, where they can be returned to Anchorage, or sometimes they are flown directly from these checkpoints in small planes from the Iditarod Air Force. And then when the dogs get back to Anchorage, they're taken over to the drop dog area at the lakefront, and they have special volunteers who deal with drop dogs who will take care of the dogs. And usually the mushers will have someone who is designated to come and get the dogs in Anchorage. And that's usually a handler or a friend or someone who can come and take care of the dogs until the musher returns. Now there are a few cases where for whatever reason, for timing or whatever, someone can't make it out to the lakefront that day to pick up the dog. And in that case, the dogs are taken to this minimum security prison right outside of Anchorage. And there's a special program. It's a woman's prison, and there's a special program where trained inmates are able to take care of these dogs. So they will take care of the dogs overnight there. And that's something that is a very coveted thing to be able to do. So not everyone will qualify for it, and it's considered a real, I don't know what the right term is. It's something that's very special for them to be able to do. And then the dogs will be brought back to the lakefront the next day so that they can be picked up.
I think you covered most of it. Just a couple other quick notes on a musher's side of things. When you do drop a dog, sometimes, as you mentioned, it's part of a bigger strategy. Sometimes, as you said, that folks will start with 14 and they may have bigger dogs for the first third of the race. We often compare this to a football team. Like the offensive linemen will be the bigger dogs in the team, or a particular leader may lead on a particular trail, whether it be trail conditions or whatever, going through crowds or that sort of thing. Another thing that's important to note is if a dog is injured or sick, they are still under the care of the veterinary staff until, I believe, it's 24, and it could be up to 36 hours after the dog is dropped. So even though the dog is flown to Anchorage or Nome or wherever they are flown along the trail, they are still under the care of the veterinary staff and the volunteers, just to make sure everything is kosher and the dog is healthy and whatnot. When the handlers or the family picks up the dog at the lakefront or at the prison, that becomes a whole process in and of itself, especially if it's not a person that is part of the mushing circle of the musher, meaning a handler or somebody like that. Often it's friends and family that pick up dogs from one of these two places, and they end up caring for the dog for up to 2 weeks until the musher gets back home and is able to take care of their dog. And we were dealing with that just a couple of days ago with one of the Serum Run dogs. It was dropped in Manly, and Michelle picked it up at the airport, and it stayed here at our house for about a week before we flew it into Nome, and it became a whole process to do that. And just getting that dog to Nome was an interesting story in of itself. We had to go down, and for folks that don't know, I live up on Willow, about an hour and a half north of Anchorage, and we had to go down the night before to weigh the dog and make sure that the crate was appropriate and all that. And then we had to show up at 4 o'clock the next morning to ship the dog to Nome. So I ended up having to spend a night in a hotel because the customer service part of Northern Air Cargo wasn't open at 4 a.m., so we had to do it the night before. So it became almost a 24-hour process just to get one dog home. And I say that because a lot of folks will drop many dogs over the course of the race. They typically will drop them along the trail where they find the need. So that volunteer, that handler, that family or friend really is doing a lot of behind the scenes work, and we have to definitely show our thanks to them for sure, because it definitely takes a team to get everybody down the trail. So other than that, drop dog is not necessarily a bad thing. Often it is for relatively minor issues, and like we said, often it's part of a strategy.
Right. And the one other thing that I want to mention is that although this does happen, most of the time, mushers will be aware that there is something that is going on with a dog and will opt to drop the dog. There also are occasions, and this is relatively rare, where a vet will notice something about a dog that the musher hasn't noticed, and the vet will insist that the dog has been dropped. But as I said, most of the time, these are mushers who know their, especially if it's a dog that is from their own kennel, they know this dog very, very well, and they will recognize that something is going on with the dog long before the vet does. And as you said, most of the time it's something that's relatively small. It might be a pulled muscle or some sort of mild virus or kennel cough or something like that that will clear itself out, within 24, 48, 72 hours.
Right. And one last thing with that, often mushers will pull into a checkpoint, and if they're going to stay there for a while, especially on those 8-hour or 24-hour rests, they will talk to the veterinary staff when they get there, and they say, hey, I'm a little concerned about this dog or a pair of dogs, but I'm going to let it sit out and let them get that rest, whether it be that 8-hour, 24-hour, or even a 6-hour rest or whatever they're going to do. And then they're kind of on notice with the vet. The vet knows that it's potentially going to drop this dog, and then of course they can make the precautions with that, and then of course maybe rest, especially on a longer rest, will allow that dog to recover, for the sore muscles to heal and whatnot, and then of course they'll continue on down the trail. So there's a lot of inner working parts to a drop dog process, and we could probably talk about it for an episode or two. And of course, if anybody has questions or concerns about it, please shoot us a message on social media, and we'll be sure to answer them. Alex, let's jump into our favorite part of the show, the musher profile of the evening. Who are we talking about?
So tonight we are talking about Damon Ramaker, or perhaps Ramaker. As I said last night, I apologize for mangling people's names. It's going to happen for the next 2 weeks. He is from Minnesota, where he operates the Deep Root Kennel, has about 25 huskies, and he lives there with his wife, 3 children, and his dogs in a yurt that they built 4 years ago. He works as an ER nurse for a hospital associated with the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Founded his kennel in 2016 with the express goal of running the 2020 Iditarod. In addition to that, he also founded a charity called the Deep Root Cause, which is a nonprofit devoted to teaching how to develop skills in order to pursue long-term goals and dreams, such as running the Iditarod. And among the things that he is looking to do with this charity is building sleds for the physically challenged, so that people who ordinarily would not be able to ride in sleds can ride in sleds and perhaps even drive dog teams, and to also give sled dog rides to mentally disabled people as part of programs to work with mental health providers, to use canine therapy, and do workshops to help those with mental health issues. And, as most people who have been around dogs will know, dogs are incredibly calming, and there is something just about being with a dog that makes almost everyone feel better. He has run mid-distance races like the Gunflint Mail Run in Minnesota, the Race to the Sky 300 in Montana, the Bear Grease and the Percy DeWolf races. And he told his hometown newspaper that he loves working in the ER because he likes coming to work without knowing in advance what each day is going to hold, which is very similar to the challenges that you face on a sled dog race. And he said that he likes knowing that he doesn't have to face that uncertainty alone. And he told his hometown paper, the ER is a dynamic environment where you really have to learn how to lean on your peers. Teamwork is critical, and nothing works here without the team, which again is very similar to the attitude you have to have in dog sled racing. He started out doing ski joring and some dog powered rescuing, and then started borrowing dogs so that he could run races before he purchased his first sled and started building his kennel around what he described as 4 misfit dogs who got the job done. He worked for 5 years with Iditarod musher Cindy Galea, who is a nurse practitioner at the Mayo Clinic. And he said that he just sent her an email one day and said he was interested in learning more about how to manage a bigger kennel. And she was happy to show him what she had learned and give him advice. She didn't have a full-time handler, so Damon came up to Alaska with her and helped her out on the trail on some of her Iditarod runs, and they developed a friendship. And when he mentioned that he was interested in getting serious and running the Iditarod himself, her one piece of advice to him was, make sure that you clear this with your wife first. And luckily, Damon's wife was on board with that, and he was able to proceed. He told KTCC, a local television station, that what he likes best about dog sled racing is you are continually presented with different challenges that just require critical thinking and working your way through them. And hopefully you make the right decisions and then you get to move on. He is currently in 49th place. He's running a very good race so far, and he's very solidly in the middle of the pack. And, obviously, as with everybody, we wish him a great race and hope that he does very well. But he seems to be doing really, really great so far.
What a cool story for sure. I was watching the coverage of the restart on Sunday, and right there when he was getting ready to start, he jumped up and gave Cindy a huge hug, and I'm sure he was ready to go at that point, and I'm sure his mentor was very proud. One thing I want to talk a little bit about, Alex, is that 5-year mentorship that he had with Cindy. And I say that because during the commentary, Dallas Seavey was talking about typically it's a 2 or a 3-year mentorship at the Seavey's kennel, but he spent 5 years prepping for this, working with Cindy, and of course doing all of these other races, which is a considerably long time to be kind of an understudy for one of these mentors. Do you agree?
Yeah, it seems that way to me. I wonder if part of that is that he was working full time and not in Alaska, and so it would presumably be a little bit harder to get in the hours you just need in order to learn everything, being over there in Minnesota. But it's one of the other things about him working with Cindy is we hear almost all the time from rookies about how they have found people who will teach them and will mentor them and will really, let them develop and learn the ropes. And I think that is one of the things that is most exciting about sled dog racing and the Iditarod is that, you have these people who just have this dream that they are going to run the Iditarod. And it's a dream that doesn't come true for everyone who has it. But there seems to be the attitude among Iditarod veterans that anyone who comes in and is willing to do the work deserves a shot at running the race. And I think that that's a very, very powerful message.
It is, and it's the way to go. It's very, very difficult to do this all on your own without that mentor-mentee internship, so to speak. It's tough to get good dogs. Often you'll get sort of, and I use this term very loosely, throwaway dogs, meaning dogs that don't make one of the top teams, whether they're too old, too slow, whatever. So you will get the misfits, as you talked about with Damon. So when you have this type of relationship, it really sets you up to do very well. And we'll talk a lot, I'm sure, during our coverage about rookies weren't running B teams or puppy teams or yearling teams. That's sort of the process with that. And it's an interesting story, just as kind of a story that I'm sure we'll talk about with Martin Booser, who's running the B team this year, and he gave his apprentice or mentee the big team, which is a really cool story in of itself. I do want to wish Damon the best. I love hearing about the rookies and the up-and-comers. That's the stories that I really like to hear, and I'm glad we're covering them tonight. Alex, we're just about out of time. What else do you have for us, if anything?
So that's pretty much it. We're going to be monitoring what's going on. I expect that we will hear some kind of official word about Jim Lanier in the next couple of hours. And whatever has happened, I think that everyone recognizes that Jim Lanier is a really great guy, and we just wish him the best.
We do, for sure. So on behalf of that and my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto. We will see you guys next time at 7 p.m. Alaska time, 11 p.m. Eastern time, right here on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and you will get these episodes as soon as they drop. Alex, have a good evening.
You too. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio. Did you know that Alaska Dogworks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dogworks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.